Hello there. Today I want to talk about a Boba Blue deck that I ran this weekend and had quite a bit of fun with. But before we jump too far into the deck that you can see here, I want to talk about why run Boba Blue. And there's a couple answers, and most of them are that it just kind of fits my playstyle. So first off, I don't think it has any terrible matchups. It's pretty flexible, right? So against an aggro deck, we're playing control. We're trying to remove their units, and if we can get to the late game, we'll win. Against a control deck, we have enough threats like Greedo and like the Fire Spray, and even Boba Leader himself that we can sneak in quite a bit of damage. But even if it gets to that late game, we have the package in here to have the potential to win that late game. So it's pretty good. I've found that the worst matchups are really matchups that just spam the board with units early. So think Ewing reinforcement decks with either Han or some resupplies in there to get it early before we can super laser blast them all the way. So let's talk through some specific pieces. I'm not sure that this is the best way to run the deck, but I have a lot of fun having Bib, Fortuna, and Bosk in there. Bib lets you play events for one cheaper, and that can totally mess with what your opponent expects you to do. I had a game this weekend where my opponent was thinking he was in pretty good shape. I grabbed initiative and we were going into the 5 resource turn, and I played a vigilance for 5 to heal my base for 5 and kill one of his units. And he thought he was safe from vigilance for a turn. And because it's Boba, I readied a resource, right? Because I had killed a guy. Then I flipped Boba. When he attacked, I readied a couple more, and I was able to play something else, right? So I effectively got 9 resources worth of stuff out on the 5 resource turn. So Bib can do some really, really cool things. If you're playing Bib in this deck, I think you have to lean into those events, right? So I have 16 events in the main deck, not counting Super Laser Blast, because, I guess you could use it to play it a turn. You could use Bib to play it a little early. It's not typically what you're going for. But then Bosk gets even better when you have all those events in the deck, right? Because when you play an event, he gets to ping a couple damage onto somebody. And so this can create some really nice 2-for-1s where you play something like a waylay and get to deal some damage, or play a takedown and get to deal some damage. Maybe you waylay and then deal damage to take someone into takedown range. It's quite fun with these two and all of your events, with more that you can bring in the sideboard. It gets really pretty fun. I've always enjoyed having a little bit of a combo going on in my deck, and this scratches that itch. I also have just a few cheap cards in there. 3 Mining Guild TIE Fighters and 3 Greedos. With Boba's ability, readying a resource when something leaves play, a lot of times you miss out on a little bit of value if you don't have a 1 or maybe a 2 drop available. And these help fill that void, right? Because they are 1 cost. But the Mining Guild TIE Fighter helps out even more because aside from the turn that you play it, if you have some extra resources sitting around, you can draw more cards with it, which is giving you more ways to use those resources that Boba generates. If your opponent takes the time to kill your TIE Fighters, that's probably not that big of a deal because we're pretty set up for the late game. So if they're not attacking our base to deny us cards, we're getting to the late game, and we're in good shape when we get to the late game against most decks. Not every deck, but most decks. And so these are really valuable cards to have in the deck. And then when we get to the late game, we have a pretty nice anti-control package here. We're playing the Vigilances, we're playing the Bounty Hunter crews, and both of those cards are pretty decent, even if we're not playing the mill game. I love playing Bounty Hunter crew to go get a Power of the Dark Side. That's super fun to be able to play, 4 or 5 Power of the Dark Sides in one game. So it's not like we're stuck trying to play mill here. Whereas something like maybe an Iden blue deck that doesn't have as many threats to actually deal damage is really stuck with that game plan. In this deck, it's quite a bit more flexible, and so I like it that way. So let's talk through the deck as a whole and some of the things I didn't cover. You'll see that it's pretty light on the ground. We've got Bib and we've got the Viper Probe Droid, and that's it until we get all the way up to 5 resources to boss. That's kind of intentional because I don't want to turn on Super Laser Technician, and I'm really only playing the Viper Probe Droids in the aggro matchup. In other matchups, they're probably coming out, and I'm subbing in things like more I Am Your Father or Vanquish or System Patrol Craft. So I do like to stay a little light on the ground. Obviously, Bib doesn't play super well into that strategy, but that's a game time decision. If you want to lean into Bib, and if not, you just resource him and you're off on your way. We do have a decent amount of the exhaust effects in here with the Cartel Spacer and the No Good to Me Deads. And I find that those come in really helpful, especially in the early game. I played one game against a yellow Sabine where I was able to No Good to Me Dead on the turn she came out and 2 turns later. And she had been wing leadered as well. So I effectively saved 20 damage to my base by having 2 No Good to Me Deads because she would have been hitting me for 5 damage a turn, and 2 No Good to Me Deads stopped 4 turns of that. So it is a good card. I could see it being cut for more removal because it doesn't trigger Boba's ability, right? When we don't make things leave play. But it is really nice to deal with leaders. So is Entrenched, but there's becoming more and more removal, upgrade removal, I think. And so Entrenched is a great game plan to take care of their leader early if we need to use it on Sabine, or late in the game. If Boba has died, I played against a Chewy red deck, and I was just fine pivoting away from the ground entirely and just focusing on space. So I was perfectly happy to entrench Chewy. We do have a decent amount of space in here, right? So we've got the ties, we've got Inferno 4, we've got a 7th Fleet Defender, a few System Patrol Crafts, and then a bunch of Fire Sprays. And Fire Spray, I think, is a decent win condition. If you can keep your opponent's board under control, once you get to the Bosk Boba turn, that's a lot of damage that you're putting out. And if you can put in a Fire Spray on top of that, you can very easily close out the game at that point. I kind of think I want to sneak one Surprise Strike into the deck somewhere just to have even a little bit more reach. And even the threat of it, I think, makes your opponent take some maybe suboptimal plays. So I do want to find room in here just for a Surprise Strike. The Bounty Hunter crew is great, right? We have so many events that we have a lot of options of what we can return back. If we need to play the mill game, we can return Vigilance or Spark of Rebellion. A lot of times, I'm happy to just get Power of the Dark Side. I Am Your Father, I think, is especially fun in Boba because they're even less incentivized than normal to let you do the 3 damage, because if they or I'm sorry, to do the 7 damage. If they pick doing the 7 damage, then they know that you're going to ready resources when the unit leaves play. So it almost would only cost you 2 to do 7 damage in that case, and that just feels bad. So a lot of times they're giving you the cards, and that's phenomenal. I think one issue with Boba Green is that he can kind of stall if he doesn't draw the right cards, the right curve. He can struggle a little bit, and I find that this deck is really pretty consistent, especially when they're letting you draw 3 cards from I Am Your Father, and the Mining Guild TIE Fighters are mining cards for you. And then if we haven't closed out the game with Boba and Bosk and Fire Spray and all that damage that we have available by keeping your opponent's board clear, we have Super Laser Blast and Avenger. And that's really hard for a lot of decks to beat. So it's really a very flexible deck, which is why I like it. It's kind of a hard deck to pilot because there are so many options. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking this to a tournament without practicing with it, but it is a lot of fun. Then you can see in the sideboard, we have a few options to help with the mill matchups. I don't love starting out planning for those, having restock and search your feelings in the deck. If I was going to a massive tournament, I might consider that. But a lot of times I'm not used to seeing that at, just a kind of a store showdown type tournament. And, if you find that your opponent's way ahead, you can always concede gate 1, board those in and try to bring it back later. Because of our bounty hunter crews that our opponent is unlikely to have, I think we're actually favored in the matchup if we can get all 3 games in. And then a little bit more top end too. The deck can struggle, like I mentioned, with decks that focus on Ewing reinforcements. So that's why I like the second Super Laser Blast there. And decks that are ramping super, super hard into the big Star Destroyers like Relentless and their own Avenger. And so having more Avengers there can be nice. Typically, we're focused more on the mill plan. We're just trying to keep the board clear in that matchup and go for the mill. So it's a super fun deck. I hope you give it a try. Feel free to let me know if you have questions about it. I think there are quite a few good cards that I didn't include in the deck that were good options, but I've really been enjoying how this has been playing. Take care.